December 6th, 2009. A devoted mother attends church that evening, then vanishes from her own home. Her purse, wallet, and ID remain untouched. Two box fans hum softly across a damp couch, drying the spot where her blood was later found. She left no note. She never came back. 1 week before, in a quiet room, she carried a small thumb drive and spoke, as if guided by a silent fear. Covering all my bases in case something happens to me or my family. She had left a letter, hidden in a safe deposit box, that warned, if I die, it may not be an accident, even if it looks like one. Her husband claimed he took their 2 young sons camping in the middle of a snowstorm. No trace of that trip ever surfaced. Now, more than a decade later, the case is closed, but she remains missing. Her children gone, and her husband dead by his own hand. Behind the polished suburban facade, something far more unsettling unfolded. A story still echoing through the seasons of Utah's cold nights. At 28, Susan Marie Cox Powell seemed to have everything she ever wanted: a young family, a home in quiet West Valley City, Utah, and 2 small boys, Charlie and Braden, who adore their mother. Friends described her as vibrant and tender, deeply devoted to her children and hopeful for the future. But beneath her gentle smile, something had shifted in the marriage with Josh, her husband, a man who once seemed caring, who now appeared to hold tight to control. Those who knew them recall subtle changes. Josh increasingly made decisions for Susan, curbing her access to the family vehicle, limiting her control over money, even undermining her role as a mother in front of the children. To outsiders, the couple appeared stable, but behind closed doors, tension had begun to take root. Susan quietly documented her on knees.
This is me, July 29th, 2008. It is 12:33 Mountain Time. Covering all my bases, making sure that if something happens to me or my family or all of us, that our assets are documented. Hope everything works out and we're all happy and live happily ever after, as much as that's possible.
She filmed their belongings, noting damage and missing items. She even wrote a letter, locking it away, where she confessed the turmoil in her marriage and warned that if anything happened to her, it might not be an accident. Josh, meanwhile, struggled under the weight of financial hardship. He had declared bankruptcy, revealing overwhelming debt. Strain over money, control, and trust deepened the divide between husband and wife. In the neighborhood, they still looked like a typical family, smiling in photos, attending church, raising 2 beautiful boys in a modest suburban home. But appearances can deceive. At first glance, they seemed like the perfect family, but appearances can deceive. Have you ever noticed how some smiles hide the deepest secrets? To understand the night Susan Powell disappeared, you have to step inside the marriage she was trying to survive. By 2008, the cracks were showing. Financial struggles were constant. Josh had declared bankruptcy only a year earlier, and debts weighed heavily on the family. But it wasn't just money. Those close to Susan began to notice how Josh's need for control seeped into every corner of her life. He managed their bank accounts, often leaving Susan without access to basic funds. He monitored her spending, restricted her use of the family car, and belittled her decisions in front of the children. Friends recalled moments when Josh openly undermined her authority, stepping in to comfort the boys after Susan had disciplined them, whispering that their mother was being unfair. To those outside their walls, Josh's behavior looked like confidence, but to Susan, it felt like control. And then there was Steve Powell, Josh's father. To Susan, her father-in-law's presence was never a source of comfort. Steve developed what can only be described as an obsession. He wrote songs for her, recorded her on video without her knowledge, and made comments that blurred the line between admiration and fixation. In private, he confessed to feelings for his daughter-in-law that no father-in-law should ever admit. Susan confided to friends that his behavior made her deeply uncomfortable, another source of unease she couldn't escape. In her personal writings, Susan began to reveal her fears. In one journal entry, she described the marriage as extreme turmoil. In another, she expressed a chilling thought. If anything were to happen to her, it would not be by chance. She spoke those words aloud, too, confiding to a co-worker that if she ever disappeared, people should look first at Josh. Her warnings, written in her own hand, now stand like echoes, unsettling premonitions of what was to come. Susan herself once said, "If I go missing, it will not be an accident." December 6th, 2009 was a Sunday like many others in West Valley City. Susan attended her morning church service, smiled politely with friends, and returned home to her modest suburban house. Neighbors saw nothing unusual, just a young mother spending the evening with her husband and 2 little boys. To everyone watching, the Powells looked like an ordinary family winding down at the end of the weekend. But that evening would be the last time anyone outside that home would see Susan alive. A friend remembered speaking with her earlier that night. Susan sounded tired but calm. She had plans for the week ahead, nothing to suggest she was preparing to vanish. Yet, as the night stretched into the early hours of the next morning, her husband Josh would later offer a story that defied reason. According to Josh, at around midnight, long after the children should have been asleep, he decided to take their 2 sons on a camping trip. The destination? The Utah desert, in the middle of a snowstorm, with temperatures well below freezing. He claimed he packed the boys into the family minivan and drove into the night, leaving Susan at home. Hours later, the sun rose on Monday, December 7th. Susan never arrived at work. She didn't drop off her boys at daycare. Her phone went silent. For a woman as devoted to her children and routine as Susan, the silence was alarming. Concerned co-workers reported her missing. Police quickly arrived at the Powell home. Inside, they found something troubling. Susan's purse was still there, along with her identification, credit cards, and personal belongings. It was as though she had simply vanished without preparing to go anywhere. Officers also noted something even more unsettling: a large damp spot on the living room carpet. 2 box fans were positioned over it, blowing air to dry the fibers. The explanation? Nowhere to be found. But later tests would reveal traces of Susan's blood within that home. The house was eerily still. No signs of forced entry, no indication of a robbery, just silence and absence. When police questioned Josh, he stuck to his story. He claimed he had taken the boys camping, that Susan must have stayed home. But investigators quickly realized how unusual his behavior was. A midnight camping trip with toddlers during a winter storm? No one they interviewed could make sense of it. And then came another disturbing detail. Shortly after Susan's disappearance, Josh rented a car, keeping it for nearly 24 hours before returning it. To this day, no one knows where he went during that time, or what he may have done. If Susan had simply gone out, why was her purse left behind? Why did her husband return with a rental car? And why, on that cold December morning, was the family's carpet still damp, drying under the steady hum of box fans? By the morning of December 7th, detectives knew something was terribly wrong. A devoted mother doesn't simply vanish. A purse, identification, and children's belongings don't just sit untouched while she disappears into thin air. All eyes turned toward the person closest to her, the man who was supposed to protect her. When questioned, Josh Powell repeated the same story. Sometime after midnight, he had bundled his young sons into the family minivan and set off into the Utah wilderness for an impromptu camping trip. He claimed Susan had stayed home. It was the kind of explanation that raised more questions than it answered. Why take 2 small children into the freezing night? Why not tell anyone where they were going? And why, of all nights, would he choose a snowstorm to camp with toddlers? Detectives pressed him, but Josh stuck to his account. He described setting up camp at a remote desert site. Yet when officers searched the area, there was no trace of the Powells, no tent, no fire pit, no evidence that they had ever been there at all. The snowy ground held no footprints, no tire marks. His story dissolved into the cold air of the desert. Neighbors began to come forward. Some remembered the whir of a car engine late that night, lights flickering across the street at unusual hours. Others recalled the sound of movement inside the Powell home long after the family was normally asleep. To the community, it didn't add up. To investigators, it looked like the pieces of a disturbing puzzle. Inside the house, the evidence was mounting. Susan's purse and ID were still there. Her keys and wallet had not moved. Her cell phone sat silent. There were no signs of struggle, but the eerie detail of that damp carpet and the humming box fans haunted the investigation. Detectives began to see a pattern. A young mother who had already expressed fear for her safety, a husband with a story that couldn't be verified, and a home that spoke louder than words. Yet without Susan's body or a clear crime scene, they faced a daunting challenge. Was Josh telling the truth, however unlikely it seemed? Or was this alibi something far more deliberate? Do you believe Josh's camping story, or was it a carefully crafted lie? As the days passed, the disappearance of Susan Powell transformed from a private family crisis into a story gripping the nation. Friends, co-workers, and neighbors rallied together, printing flyers, organizing searches, pleading with the public for information. Candlelight vigils lit up the cold Utah nights as a community demanded answers. But while the world searched for Susan, suspicion inside the investigation focused more and more on Josh. Detectives found him evasive, his story unchanging but brittle under scrutiny. He avoided answering certain questions directly. He lawyered up quickly, refusing to sit for follow-up interviews without representation. When asked to take a polygraph, he hesitated. He never joined the public searches for his wife. For many, that silence spoke volumes. And then, another chilling detail came to light. Attention turned toward Josh's father, Steve Powell. Investigators uncovered journals and recordings that revealed something disturbing. Steve had developed a fixation on Susan. He admitted on tape to being in love with her. He wrote lyrics, poems, and obsessive entries about her. He even filmed her without her knowledge. For Susan, this was not affection. It was harassment, another reason she felt unsafe. She had confided her discomfort, even told friends that her father-in-law's advances made her skin crawl. Now, with Susan missing, those disturbing writings only deepened the shadows surrounding the Powell family. Detectives pressed forward, and what they found next shook even the most seasoned among them. Locked away, Susan had left behind a secret will and testament. In her own handwriting, she documented the turmoil in her marriage and her growing fear of her husband. One line in particular was devastating. "If I die, it may not be an accident, even if it looks like one." It was a warning, a desperate attempt to leave behind the truth she feared might one day be buried with her. Investigators now had Susan's own words, a haunting echo of her fear, but still no physical evidence strong enough to tie Josh directly to her disappearance. Every clue seemed to point back to the Powells, but still, no body, no crime scene. By 2012, more than 2 years after Susan's disappearance, the search for answers had stretched into a bitter legal battle. With Josh increasingly under suspicion, the Powell family fractured under scrutiny. Investigators shifted their focus to protecting the children, Charlie and Braden, the only living connection to Susan. A custody battle erupted. Susan's parents, Chuck and Judy Cox, fought tirelessly to bring their grandsons into a safer environment. As evidence mounted against Josh, not only his strange behavior, but also the disturbing materials uncovered in his father Steve's home, authorities grew convinced that the children were in danger. Josh lost custody. His visits with the boys were restricted to being supervised by a state-appointed social worker. For many, this seemed like a small step toward preventing another tragedy. But no one could have foreseen the horror about to unfold. February 5th, 2012. It was supposed to be just another supervised visit at Josh's home in Graham, Washington. The boys, ages 7 and 5, ran ahead of the social worker, excited to see their father. But the moment they crossed the threshold, Josh pulled them inside and slammed the door shut. The social worker was left outside, locked out, helpless. Within minutes, the home erupted in flames. Neighbors described the explosion as deafening, a blast that shook the street. Fire tore through the small house, consuming everything inside. Emergency responders rushed to the scene, but it was already too late. Josh Powell had killed his 2 sons before igniting the explosion that ended all 3 of their lives. On a frantic 911 call, the social worker could be heard pleading for help, her voice breaking with panic. "There's nothing I can do. I just watched the boys run in the house, and he shut the door." Those haunting words captured the sheer helplessness of the moment. The tragedy sent shockwaves across the nation. For Susan's parents, the devastation was beyond measure. They had lost their daughter under mysterious circumstances, and now their grandsons, the last ties to her memory, were gone in an instant. Chuck Cox later said, "It's just more than we can bear. Josh took everything from us." To this day, questions remain. Did Josh plan this final act from the very beginning? Was the murder-suicide his way of maintaining control when the walls closed in? Or was it the desperate act of a man watching his world collapse? Whatever the answer, the Powell tragedy left a scar that will never fade. In the wake of the fiery tragedy, the investigation into Susan Powell's disappearance remained officially open. Yet with Josh and his father gone, the 2 people who may have held the darkest secrets of the case, the trail grew cold. Susan's body has never been found. Despite years of searches across Utah's deserts, abandoned mines, and remote mountain trails, no trace of her has ever surfaced. For her family, the absence of closure is a wound that has never healed. The Powell case left behind not just grief, but outrage. How could 2 young children, already caught in the shadow of their mother's disappearance, have been allowed back into their father's care, even under supervision? Public pressure grew, and lawmakers responded. In Washington state, reforms to child custody laws were passed, including the Charlie and Braden Act, aimed at strengthening protections for children in potentially dangerous custody disputes. It was a small measure of change, forged out of unimaginable loss. Susan's parents, Chuck and Judy Cox, continue to honor their daughter's memory. They have spoken at vigils, organized awareness campaigns, and fought to keep her case alive in the public eye. For them, every year that passes without answers is another reminder of the justice denied. And yet, the central question remains, where is Susan Powell? Was she buried deep in Utah's vast desert, hidden in the rugged mountains, or perhaps placed somewhere much closer to home? Without a body, speculation continues and theories multiply. Each lead that surfaces is met with hope, and too often, disappointment. More than a decade later, her disappearance lingers as one of America's most haunting unsolved mysteries. Susan's smiling face, once captured in family photos, now frozen on missing person posters, remains a symbol of both tragedy and resilience. Her story is not just about loss, but about the determination of those who loved her to never stop searching for the truth. More than a decade has passed since that winter night in 2009, and still, the mystery of Susan Powell endures. Theories swirl, but the truth remains elusive. Did Josh Powell kill his wife and hide her body somewhere in Utah's vast wilderness? Could his father, Steve Powell, have played a larger role than investigators ever proved? Or is there another truth, something no one has uncovered and may never know? What do you believe happened to Susan Powell? Was her fate sealed the night she vanished? Or do the answers still lie hidden, waiting to be found? Share your theory in the comments below. Your perspective might shed light on a mystery that continues to haunt us all. The disappearance of Susan Powell remains one of the most haunting unsolved cases in America. But her story is not the only mystery that casts a shadow over Utah. There are other disappearances, other tragedies that still leave investigators baffled and families searching for answers. If this story shook you, make sure to hit subscribe, drop a like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Join us as we continue to uncover the truth behind the darkest true crime mysteries, because some stories refuse to stay buried.